No, Jaya corrected him. Because you were ready to see it. That's what we were waiting for all along. Together, they watched ships coming and going from the council station, vessels of all species, no longer divided by empire or territory. The golden light of human ships mixed with the diverse technologies of 100 worlds, all moving forward together. The warning that had started it all had indeed been mercy, but it had also been an invitation, a chance for the galaxy to become something greater than conquest and control. And finally, after millennia of waiting, that chance had been accepted. Du Jin paused at the door. Because they didn't want to rule, he said simply. They wanted to protect. And now they're protecting the galaxy from us. He looked back at the council. The choice is yours. Continue fighting and be transformed by force, or accept their help and learn to be something better. Myray watched from orbit as ships continued to leave the capital. But they weren't fleeing in terror. They were choosing a new path. The hegemony was ending not with a battle, but with an awakening. Would you like me to continue with Part 7, showing the final transformation of the galaxy under human guidance? The new Galactic Council chamber reflected the changes that had swept across known space. Unlike the towering, intimidating hall of the old hegemony, this room was circular and open, with windows showing the stars above. Representatives from 100 species sat together as equals, their seats arranged in gentle ascending curves like waves on an ocean. General Jia stood at the center, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the ornate robes the hegemony leaders once wore. The golden light that had transformed the galaxy now filled the chamber with a warm, welcoming glow. 1 year ago, we revealed ourselves, she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the chamber. 1 year ago, we showed you what humanity had hidden for so long. Many of you asked why we waited, why we watched as the hegemony conquered and ruled. Today, I will tell you the full truth. The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of environmental systems seemed to fade away as all attention focused on the human leader. Long ago, our ancestors, the ones you called progenitors, ruled the galaxy. They had power beyond imagination, but power corrupted them. Wars nearly destroyed everything. In the end, they'd made a choice. Instead of ruling, they would guard. Instead of conquering, they would protect. Holograms appeared around the chamber, showing scenes from ancient history, worlds being seeded with life, civilizations rising and falling, and always watching from hidden places, the guardians. We are their children, Jaya continued. We inherited their power, but also their wisdom. We learned from their mistakes. That's why we hid ourselves on Earth, pretending to be primitive. We wanted to give younger races the chance to grow naturally, to find their own path. Admiral Du Jin, now representing his people as part of the new alliance, nodded slowly. He remembered his own arrogance when first approaching Earth, how quickly that arrogance had turned to understanding. We didn't want war, Jayat explained, looking at each representative in turn. We never did. That's why we warned hegemony. That's why we demonstrated our power without taking a single life. Humanity remembers its past, both the glories and the mistakes. Now we offer to help rebuild, and this time, we'll do it right. The chamber erupted in discussion, but not in fear or anger. Representatives from former hegemony worlds spoke of the medical advances they'd received. Outer Rim colonies described how human guidance had helped them establish sustainable governments. Former enemies found themselves working together on joint projects. We offer you a choice, Jaya continued when the chamber quieted. Not submission, not control, but partnership. We will share our knowledge gradually. As each world shows it's ready, we will teach, but never rule. Guide, but never dominate. Do Jin stood from his seat, drawing all eyes. When they first warned us to run, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We thought it was a threat. We thought they were afraid. We were wrong. He looked around the chamber. It was mercy. They tried to spare us from forcing their hand. And even when we ignored that mercy, They showed us more. The council session continued long into the night. Plans were made, agreements forged, and a new era began. The humans shared stories of their long vigil, of watching and waiting, of the responsibility they had inherited from their ancestors. As the session ended, Jaya found herself standing with Du Jin by the chamber's windows, looking out at the stars. "Do you regret revealing yourselves?" he asked quietly. Jaya smiled. "No, the galaxy was ready. Look at what's already been accomplished in 1 year. Diseases cured, poverty reduced, former enemies working together. Because you showed us a better way," Du Jin said. The Golden Fleet regrouped, preparing to move to their next target. Already, reports were coming in from across hegemony space of similar operations. Everywhere, military installations were being transformed, not destroyed. Weapons were being turned to peaceful purposes. Message from Earth Command, Taiho announced. The hegemony's Central Council is requesting negotiations. Jaya looked out at the transformed shipyard, at the disabled but unharmed ships floating nearby. "Tell them we'll meet," she said. "But first, we finish our demonstration. The galaxy needs to remember why the progenitors chose guardians instead of rulers." As the Golden Fleet prepared to jump to their next target, Jaya reflected on how long humanity had waited for this moment. Centuries of hiding their true nature, watching as the hegemony conquered and subjugated world after world. But now the waiting was over. The guardians had awakened, and the galaxy would remember why they had been feared and respected so long ago. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, showing how the hegemony begins to unravel as more worlds witness humanity's power? The Grand Council chamber that had once inspired awe now felt empty and cold. Supreme Chancellor He Newell stood alone at the towering windows, watching ships flee the capital world's orbit. Behind him, the emergency council session had dissolved into chaos as news of more defections poured in. 12 major systems have formally surrendered to the humans, an aide reported nervously, keeping his distance from the troubled leader. The Centauri colonies are voting to secede. The rigid worlds have declared independence. The Outer Rim, he hesitated before continuing. The Outer Rim refuses to answer our communications. Newell pressed his forehead against the cool glass. In just 1 week, his mighty empire had begun crumbling like sand in a storm. The golden ships of the humans appeared everywhere at once, systematically dismantling military installations without firing a single lethal shot. The chamber doors burst open as Admiral Du Jin strode in, no longer wearing his hegemony uniform. Instead, he wore simple civilian clothes, and his face showed a calm determination that scared He Newell more than any anger could have. "I'm here to announce my withdrawal from the hegemony military," Du Jin declared, his voice echoing in the chamber. "1/3 of the fleet stands with me. We will no longer serve an empire built on conquest." And the room fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony hadn't just attacked a primitive world. They had challenged the creators of all galactic civilization, the guardians who had been watching and waiting for countless millennia. "Their warning," He Newell said, his voice barely audible. "They weren't afraid of us." "No," Yunho agreed. "They were trying to prevent what they would have to do to us. And now," he gestured at reports coming in from across hegemony space, showing more golden ships appearing near major worlds. "Now they're awake, and they remember their duty." The Supreme Chancellor of the mighty hegemony, ruler of thousands of worlds, looked like a small, frightened child as he stared at the evidence of what they had awakened. "What can we do?" he asked. Yunho looked at the ancient texts, at the warnings they contained. "We can listen now," he said quietly, "before it's too late. Because if these records are correct, what we've seen is only a fraction of what they're capable of." Would you like me to continue with Part 5, showing how the hegemony deals with this revelation as humanity begins its broader response? The Golden Fleet emerged from hyperspace like a school of metallic fish, moving in perfect harmony. At their head, the flagship, Guardian's Light, gleamed brightest of all, its surface rippling with energy patterns that defied conventional physics. General Jia stood on its command deck, watching as her ships spread out in an elegant attack formation that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for 50,000 years. "All ships report ready," Colonel Tahoe announced from his station. The holographic displays around them showed hundreds of vessels, each one a masterpiece of ancient engineering finally revealed in its true form. "The Hegemony shipyard has detected our presence. They're raising shields and scrambling their defense fleet." Jaya nodded slowly, her expression serene despite the impending battle. "Open a channel to all ships," she ordered. When the communication line activated, she spoke clearly and calmly. "Remember your training. We are not here for revenge. We are here to demonstrate why our ancestors chose to hide rather than rule. Minimal force. No casualties." The Hegemony shipyard grew larger in their view screens, a massive structure that had built warships for 1,000 years of conquest. Defense platforms activated around it, their weapons charging. A fleet of 50 ships moved to intercept the human forces. "They're broadcasting warnings," Tahoe reported, "threatening to destroy us if we come closer." A slight smile crossed his face. "They still don't understand what they're dealing with." "Show them," Jaya ordered quietly. Golden light erupted from the human fleet, but instead of destroying the Hegemony ships, it enveloped them in a shimmering field. Inside the field, every weapon system and engine simply stopped working. The ships hung motionless in space, their crews unharmed but helpless. "First wave neutralized," Tahoe announced, moving on to the shipyard defenses. The human ships flowed around the disabled Hegemony vessels, like water around rocks in a stream. More golden beams lanced out, systematically shutting down every defense platform. Not a single shot was fired in return. The Hegemony weapons couldn't lock onto the human ships, as if they weren't quite fully in normal space. "Shipyard Control Center is hailing us," an officer reported. "There," he paused, surprised, "they're offering to surrender." Jaya smiled slightly. "Accept their surrender. Begin the demonstration." The human fleet surrounded the massive shipyard. Golden energy flowed from their ships, enveloping the entire structure. Where it touched, the energy transformed the shipyard's technology, changing it at the molecular level. Weapons became harmless. Power systems were modified to prevent them from being used for warfare. "Transformation complete," Tahoe reported after 45 minutes. "The shipyard can now only produce civilian vessels. All military production capabilities have been permanently altered." Jaya nodded with satisfaction. "Send the message to their central command. The same message we sent to Earth's would-be invaders. This is your only warning." Through the view screens, they watched as the Hegemony crews were allowed to return to their ships, which had been similarly transformed. The once mighty warships could now only function as peaceful transport vessels. "No casualties," Tahoe confirmed, checking the final reports. "Not a single death or serious injury on either side." "Just as planned," Jaya said softly. "They needed to see that we could have destroyed them, but chose not to. That's the lesson our ancestors wanted taught. Power doesn't have to mean destruction." "Your weapons are now disabled," Jaya continued. "Your engines will power down in exactly 1 minute. You will be boarded and your crews will be treated humanely. Resist, and we will be forced to demonstrate even more of what we can do. The choice is yours." As the transmission ended, Dujin looked around his bridge, at the faces of his crew who had never known defeat, who had never imagined this outcome was possible. The mighty Hegemony, brought low in minutes by a species they had dismissed as primitive. "Sir," Mireille asked quietly, "your orders." Dujin straightened his uniform, trying to salvage what dignity he could from this disaster. "Power down all weapons. Prepare to be boarded." He looked out at the golden ships now surrounding his fleet. "We made a terrible mistake, Captain. We didn't just underestimate them. We never stood a chance." As the last systems on his ship powered down, Dujin finally understood the true meaning of the human's warning. It hadn't been bravado or desperation. It had been mercy. They had tried to prevent this slaughter, and the hegemony had been too proud to listen. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, showing the aftermath of this battle and the revelations about humanity's true nature? Shoulder Yunho's hands shook as he read the ancient text for the third time. The central archives of the hegemony stretched endlessly around him, filled with records from millions of worlds, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from this single document. The soft blue glow of his reading light cast shadows across the yellowed pages of a book so old its binding was crumbling. "This can't be right," he muttered to himself, pushing his glasses back up his nose. But the evidence was there, hidden in plain sight across thousands of years of historical records. Signs and symbols that matched perfectly with what they'd seen in the human attack. The golden light, the impossible technology, the warning they had given. Yunho gathered his notes and rushed through the towering shelves of the archive, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Other scholars looked up in surprise. Running was strictly forbidden in the archives, but he didn't care. This was too important. He burst into the small research room he'd been using, walls covered with holographic displays showing images from Earth, from the battle, from ancient ruins across 100 worlds. His hands trembled as he laid out the old texts next to modern battle footage. The golden ships that had destroyed the pacification fleet. Their design matched exactly with carvings found on planets across the galaxy. The same impossible technology, the same graceful lines, the same devastating power. But those carvings were over 50,000 years old. "The progenitors," he whispered, tracing the ancient symbols with his finger. "All this time, we thought they were gone." Every spacefaring race knew the legends of the progenitors, the mysterious species that had seeded the galaxy with life eons ago. They had vanished long before the hegemony arose, leaving behind only ruins and mysteries, or so everyone had believed. Yunho activated his communication device, his voice urgent. "I need an immediate audience with Supreme Chancellor Haenul. Emergency priority." The bureaucrats tried to delay him, but Yunho's security clearance as chief scholar finally got him through. Within an hour, he stood in the Chancellor's private office, spreading his evidence across the old leader's desk. "Look at these patterns," Yunho explained, hands moving frantically between documents. "The energy signatures from the human weapons match exactly with readings from progenitor ruins. Their ships used the same design principles, even their warning. It matches the protocol described in these ancient texts." Haenul's face grew paler with each piece of evidence. "Are you saying Earth isn't their homeworld?" Yunho continued. "It's their fortress, a hidden outpost they created to watch over their creations. The humans aren't just another species. They're the descendants of the progenitors themselves, the warrior race that shaped our galaxy." The scholar activated a hologram showing the battle footage. "See these transformation sequences? Their technology didn't advance naturally. It was there all along, disguised. They've been hiding in plain sight, pretending to be primitive while watching us, waiting." Haenul sank into his chair, his aged hands gripping the armrests. "We've awakened the Guardians," he whispered, finally understanding the true magnitude of their mistake. "It's worse than that," Yunho said quietly. "According to these records, the progenitors didn't just seed life. They protected it. They had strict rules about conquest and exploitation." He looked directly at the Chancellor. "Everything the hegemony has done for the past 10,000 years has violated those rules." Jaya checked the tactical display. "About 3 minutes until their sensors detect the changes. Another 2 minutes after that before they understand what it means." She shook her head slowly. "We gave them a chance. Remember that. We always give them a chance." The command center hummed with activity as humanity's real defense forces came online. Centuries of preparation were culminating in this moment. The hegemony was about to learn why Earth had remained isolated for so long, why humans had pretended to be primitive. They were about to learn that they hadn't found a new world to conquer. They had found the guardians of the galaxy, the descendants of those who had seeded the stars with life, and they had ignored their only warning. "All stations report ready," Taiho announced. "Awaiting your command, General." Jaya looked at the approaching fleet one last time. "Begin the defense protocol," she ordered. "Let's show them who they're really dealing with." "Would you like me to continue with Part 3, showing what happens when the hegemony fleet encounters humanity's true defenses?" Admiral Dujin's confidence shattered the moment the first golden beam of light pierced his flagship's shields. The impossible happened in slow motion before his eyes. The beam cut through their most advanced defensive technology, like it wasn't even there. On the bridge of the Star Wanderer, alarms blared as systems began failing across the ship. "Shields ineffective," a crew member shouted, panic evident in his voice. "Unknown energy signature detected." Dojin gripped the railing of his command platform as another blast rocked the ship. Through the main viewport, he watched in horror as 3 of his destroyer escorts simply vanished, consumed by golden light that seemed to ignore every law of physics the hegemony understood. "Status report," he demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady as his mighty pacification fleet began falling apart around him. Captain Mayray's hands trembled as she read from her datapad. Her usual composure had cracked, replaced by naked fear. "Sir, we've lost 60% of the fleet in the first wave alone. The human weapons, they're not just bypassing our shields. She paused, swallowing hard. "They're shutting down our systems completely." Another explosion lit up space as a cruiser disappeared in a flash of golden light. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as seemingly primitive satellites transformed before their eyes, revealing weapons platforms that had been disguised as simple communication arrays. "Impossible," Dujin whispered, watching as more golden beams lanced out from the Earth's moon. The small research base they had detected there had transformed into a massive fortress, its ancient architecture now clearly visible as it shed its camouflage. "New contacts," the sensor officer shouted. "Multiple vessels emerging from the lunar surface." The ships that rose from hidden bases on the moon moved with impossible grace and speed. They were beautiful in a terrifying way. Sleek golden vessels that looked more like works of art than warships. They flowed through space like living things, effortlessly evading every shot fired by the increasingly desperate hegemony fleet. "Sir," Mayray's voice cracked as she delivered more bad news, "we're detecting similar energy signatures from Earth's surface. Something is powering up beneath their oceans, beneath their continents. They're everywhere." Dujin watched as his carefully planned invasion crumbled in minutes. The humans hadn't been primitive at all. They had been waiting, hiding their true nature behind a carefully constructed mask of technological inferiority. "All ships, retreat," he ordered, finally accepting the reality of their situation. "Emergency jump protocols, get us out of this system." But the humans had planned for that too. As the remaining hegemony ships attempted to activate their faster-than-light drives, they discovered another horrible truth. Nothing worked. Their advanced technology, the pride of 10,000 years of development, had been reduced to useless metal by whatever the humans were using against them. "They're hailing us," the communications officer announced, his voice barely a whisper. The holographic display activated, showing a human woman in a military uniform. General Jadal looked at them, not with hatred or triumph, but with something that felt even worse: pity. "We warned you," she said simply. "We gave you a chance to leave peacefully. Now you understand why." Dujin wanted to respond, to demand answers about how this was possible, but another golden beam sliced through 2 more of his ships, cutting off whatever he might have said. As the message was sent, Dujin returned to studying the holographic display. He had already begun planning the invasion in his mind. A simple show of force usually sufficed, perhaps the destruction of one of their larger cities. After that, they would fall in line like all the others. But somewhere in the back of his mind, that odd feeling of unease remained. There was something different about these humans, something he couldn't quite identify. He pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to fatigue from their long journey. How could he know that this simple survey mission would change the galaxy forever? Would you like me to continue with Part 2 in the same style and level of detail? The Grand Council chamber of the hegemony stretched upward into darkness, its walls covered in trophies from 1,000 conquered worlds. Supreme Chancellor Haynul sat on his elevated throne, studying the holographic message from Earth with barely concealed boredom. The soft blue light from the projection cast eerie shadows across his aged face. One warning. He chuckled, the sound echoing through the vast chamber. In 10,000 years of conquest, every species has given us warnings. Empty threats from primitives who don't understand their place in the galaxy. The council members seated below him shifted uncomfortably. Most were seasoned politicians who had overseen countless planetary acquisitions, but something about this situation felt different. The human message had been too confident, too calm. Supreme Chancellor, one of the older council members, spoke up, his voice wavering slightly. Perhaps we should conduct more detailed scans before proceeding. The resource expenditure would be minimal compared to... Haynul's hand slashed through the air, cutting off the suggestion. No, we are the hegemony. We do not delay because primitives make threats. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the gathered council members. Or do you suggest we show weakness? The chamber fell silent. No one dared to speak against the Supreme Chancellor, not after what had happened to the last council member who had questioned his judgment. Haynul pressed a button on his throne's armrest, and a larger hologram appeared in the center of the chamber, showing the Earth Fleet deployment plans. Deploy the pacification fleet, he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 10 millennia of uncontested authority. Standard procedure: show them our power, accept their surrender, and add their world to our empire. Nothing more needs to be said. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, in a command center that hadn't existed in any official records for centuries, General Jia stood before a wall of screens showing the approaching hegemony fleet. The room was filled with the quiet efficiency of a military operation long prepared for this moment. They're following standard invasion patterns, Colonel Taiho reported from his station. Multiple heavy cruisers supported by destroyer squadrons. They're positioning for a show of force, likely targeting one of our major cities. Jaya nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but humanity had prepared for this possibility for generations. She walked to the central command console, her footsteps echoing on the metal floor. They'd never listen, she said softly, more to herself than to her staff. No matter how many times we warned them, they'd never listen. She turned to Taiho, her voice firming with resolve. Activate Protocol Omega. All stations, commence Operation Awakening. Taiho's fingers flew across his console, sending coded signals to facilities hidden across the globe. Deep within the Earth, in caverns that hadn't seen light for millennia, ancient machinery began to hum with power. The sound built slowly, a deep vibration that resonated through the planet's crust. In orbit, the seemingly primitive satellites that the hegemony had dismissed began to change. Panels shifted, revealing technology that shouldn't have existed. Golden light rippled across their surfaces as dormant systems awakened. First wave transformation complete, an operator announced. Orbital defense grid online. Shield generators activating. Jaya watched the screens as humanity's true technological face began to reveal itself. The facade they had maintained for so long was finally dropping. She felt a mixture of relief and sadness, relief that they could finally stop hiding, sadness that it had come to this. Signal from the lunar base, another operator called out. The garrison is ready. They're beginning their transformation sequence. The humans' primitive moon base was suddenly enveloped in a shimmer of golden energy. When it cleared, a massive fortress stood revealed, its ancient weapon systems targeting the approaching hegemony fleet. How long until they realize what they're facing? Taiho asked quietly. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before the hegemony flagship Star Wanderer, as it emerged from hyperspace at the edge of a previously unexplored solar system. The ship's sensors immediately began scanning the third planet from the local star, a beautiful blue-green orb suspended in the darkness. High Admiral Du Jin stood with perfect posture, his silver uniform gleaming under the bridge lights as he studied the holographic display. His dark eyes narrowed slightly as the initial data streamed in. After conquering hundreds of worlds, he had developed an instinct for evaluating potential acquisitions, and something about this planet made him uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. Another primitive world, he murmured, more to himself than to his crew. The bridge crew continued their work silently, knowing better than to interrupt their admiral's thoughts. The only sound was the soft hum of equipment and the occasional beep of incoming data. Captain Myra walked briskly across the bridge, her boots clicking against the polished floor. She was young for her rank, but her efficiency had earned her the position of second in command. She held a datapad in her hands, her fingers moving quickly across its surface as she compiled the initial survey results. "Hi, Admiral," she said, stopping precisely 3 steps away from him as protocol demanded. "I have the preliminary report on the indigenous civilization." Du Jin turned slightly, acknowledging her presence with a small nod. "Proceed, Captain." "The species calls themselves humans," Mayray reported, her voice clear and professional. "They have established a basic presence in space. We've detected several orbital stations, primarily for communication and observation purposes. They maintain a single base on their moon, though it appears to be primarily for research." "Their level of advancement?" Du Jin asked, though he could already guess from the primitive spacecraft he saw orbiting the planet. "Based on our observations of their technology, they are approximately 3 centuries behind our current level of development," Mayray answered. "Their spacecraft use chemical propulsion, and their weapons systems appear to be based on kinetic principles. No sign of energy weapons or shield technology." Du Jin walked closer to the holographic display, studying the planet's continents and oceans. The resource readings were impressive, significant deposits of rare elements that the hegemony always needed for their advanced technology. He noticed clusters of lights on the night side of the planet, indicating their major population centers. "What's their population?" he asked. "Approximately 8 billion, Mayray replied. "They appear to be divided into various nation-states rather than having a unified planetary government." Du Jin smiled slightly. Divided planets were always easier to conquer. "Perfect. They'll make excellent servants once properly trained. Their physical form is surprisingly similar to ours. That will make them more valuable in the labor markets." Following standard protocol, Du Jin ordered the deployment of a diplomatic vessel. The hegemony always offered planets the chance to surrender peacefully before resorting to force. It was more efficient that way, and it gave them the appearance of being civilized conquerors. The diplomatic vessel, a sleek silver ship designed to impress primitive species, moved into high orbit above Earth. They transmitted the standard greeting message in all known languages, along with a demonstration of their superior technology to ensure the humans understood their position. The response came quickly. A single message broadcast on all frequencies. At first, the bridge crew thought their translation systems had malfunctioned because of how brief it was. "Leave now. This is your only warning." The message was repeated 3 times, then silence. Du Jin actually laughed out loud, something his crew had rarely heard. The sound echoed across the bridge, causing several officers to look up from their stations in surprise. "They all say something similar," he said, shaking his head in amusement. "Every primitive species thinks they can resist. It's almost endearing." Mayray studied her datapad with a slight frown. "Sir, there is something odd about their message. The transmission technology they used. It's more advanced than their other systems would suggest." Du Jin waved her concern away. "Probably just a lucky breakthrough in that particular field. We've seen it before. Species that advance quickly in one area while remaining primitive in others." He turned to his communications officer. "Send the standard response. Inform them that resistance is futile. and that surrender will result in better treatment for their population.